Hello, my name is Etsko Schuitema, and I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce you to a set of ideas which we refer to as the intent thematic. The intent thematic is an exploration of human excellence in three areas of discourse. First of all, there's the area of personal excellence, which is concerned with dealing with oneself. Then there's the area of team excellence, or dealing with peers. And then there's the area of leadership excellence, or dealing with hierarchy. All three of those areas of discourse share a common thread, which is that you can account for success in them on the basis of the intent to give or serve. When one applies that insight to groups or teams, it is apparent that one accounts for the success of a team based on how it performs or the results that it produces. If one thinks about an enterprise, for example, any successful enterprise produces a profit or a surplus. How one accounts for the surplus becomes apparent when one explores the idea of three bakers working together to bake a cake. They spend an entire month to bake a particular cake, and at the end of the month the cake is sold. Each baker takes a piece of the cake home to feed themselves and their families, but there's a slice of the cake that's left, which we would refer to as the surplus, and we would account for the success of this enterprise based on the size of that slice vis-a-vis the rest of the cake. The bigger that slice is, the more successful the enterprise. Now, clearly that slice only exists because the entire cake that was baked was bigger than what each individual took home. In other words, collectively, these bakers gave more than what they took, which means to say that one accounts for the success of groups based on the degree to which the individual gives unconditionally in pursuit of the group's objectives. Now, what we have found is that people very rarely do that for an organization. People don't work for organizations because they want to. They don't commit to organizations because they want to. People work for people, which basically means to say if you want to ask yourself what are the conditions under which people go the extra mile, you should be asking yourself who's the boss that they work for because they want to. We have asked that question of people throughout the world, and a typical list of responses we would get to the question would be a boss who listens, who's supportive, who's understanding, who's empathic, who's compassionate, who's honest, has a vision, is fair, is empowering, knowledgeable, experienced, and has integrity. And what becomes apparent about that list is that there's always two themes in the list. There's a theme that's got a soft feel to it, which is about listening and support. And really that theme is about care, because what the subordinate is really saying to the boss is, listen, you've got to have a sincere interest in me, don't just be in this relationship to get something out of me. But then there's a harder theme. If you work for somebody who's always honest, they won't always be nice. But the benefit to the subordinate of the boss being honest is that the subordinate knows where they stand and they can learn and they can grow. So this harder theme is all about growth, which is why subordinates want a boss to give them a vision, why the subordinate want the boss to be knowledgeable and empowering. Which means to say when people work for bosses because they want to, the boss only does two things for them. He cares for them sincerely, and it gives them an opportunity to grow. Those two themes of care and growth are absolutely universal. They're true for every human being on the planet. In a sense, one needs to understand why those themes are so universal. In order to understand that, we need to understand the nature of the question that solicits this information. In other words, what are you actually asking when you ask somebody who's the boss they'll work for because they want to? Assume you work for somebody because you want to. So it's somebody who cares for you and grows you. And that person comes to you one day and asks you to do something, you're likely to do what they ask you to do. Which basically means to say you give that person the right to ask you to do things or to exercise power over you. Which means these criteria of care and growth are the universal criteria for legitimate power. And when you see it from that point of view, the universality makes absolute sense. The first relationship of power that one has with another person in one's life is with one's parents. Now, that has to be significant because we have an understanding that there's a connection between the idea of first and the idea of principle. In other words, if you want to understand the principle of a matter, look at the first manifestation of the matter, and the first manifestation of power is parenting. In that relationship, there are two people. There's a parent and there's a child. And the job of the parent for the child is very specific. They've got to care for the child and grow the child. Which basically means to say the job of the big one for the little one in any relationship of power is care and growth. And when the subordinate experiences that the big one, the superordinate, is there to care for them and grow them, they become willing. If they experience that the boss is there for any other reason, they become resistant, irrespective of how much they get paid. Now, if we want to apply these care and growth criteria to organizations, then obviously the first thing we need to understand is how power operates in organizations. and generally power operates in hierarchies. And when you examine hierarchies, you really get the following four personality types. At the top of the hierarchy, you get a person that you can refer to as Lord Creosote, who answers to a shareholder for a result. But this result that he produces, he doesn't do it himself. He gets that from the officer class, if you like, the boss, who has the plans and produces the strategies whereby the result will be attained. This result that the boss gives to Lord Creosote, he doesn't do himself either. He gets that from a supervisory type, the overseer, whose job it is to get people to do the job. And then you get the job that the people do and a result. Now, the problem in any organization surfaces as soon as you ask anybody in the hierarchy, in other words, anybody who exercises power in the execution of his job, what his job is. If you ask the boss, for example, what his job was, he would tell you his job is to achieve a result through people. Now, by saying that, what he's really telling everybody else is that they are the resources that he's going to use to produce a result. And nobody likes to be used. So the effect of that view is that the worker feels like a resource, he feels like he's being used, and as a result, he gets decreasingly committed, and the result starts to suffer. And what we're arguing is that you can't dream to succeed unless the worker, more than anybody else, commits to the business. It is based on his commitment that he contributes to the job unconditionally and produces an exceptional result. But that commitment comes at a price, and the price is that the power that is exercised over him is legitimate. It does the thing that power is supposed to do, which is basically care and growth. And the person who exercises power over the worker is the overseer, which means to say the overseer's job is to care for and grow the worker. However, the overseer is not going to be able to do that unless he's committed, which means the boss's job is to care for and grow the overseer, and the Lord Creosote's job is to care for and grow the boss. At every instance, this care and growth job actually means an inversion of the direction of service in the reporting relationship. And that becomes apparent when you consider the following two interactions. Let's say I've got two people working for me. The one is called Joe and the other one's called Fred. And I say to Joe, Joe, in 2000 I did the job that you have to do now, and what I did worked. Don't argue with me, shut up and go and do what I did. He would probably be very disgruntled with me. If I told Fred, on the other hand, Fred, in 2000 I did the job that you have to do now, and what I did worked, it might be helpful to you to get a look at it, he'd probably be far more committed. Now, clearly, the Fred interaction resonates with the idea of care and growth. And if one asked oneself what made them different, it would appear that the difference is just who's making the choice. Joe doesn't have a choice, but Fred does have a choice. But the difference doesn't just sit in terms of the choice. The difference at a deeper level requires us to explore the difference between means and ends, and to put into those two categories either the person who's doing the job or the job that's being done. So if we look at the Joe interaction, if I said to him, in 2000 I did what you have to do and what I did worked, don't argue with me, do what I did, then clearly from his point of view, I'm using him as my means, and my end is to get a job done. In the Fred transaction, if I said to him, in 2000 I did this, it worked, it might be helpful to take a look at it, it is clear that we could have a completely different outcome to what we had in 2000. In fact, the outcome could be a catastrophe. So what I'm actually trying to do here is I'm trying to teach Fred something. My end is the person. And what gives me the opportunity to teach him something is the job that he's doing. That inversion of means and ends helps us to understand the key shift, which is really at the level of intent. Joe experiences that I am the beneficiary of the interaction. I'm trying to get something out of him. Whereas Fred experiences that he's the beneficiary. I'm trying to give him something. So in a sense, what we're arguing is that you can't ask people to be to contribute to the business and to give if the boss isn't there to give to them. The final theme that I'd like to explore is what this means for oneself, in a sense, one's personal excellence. And one way of understanding of what is important to people is to ask them, why do they go to work? Now, our experience of the answers that people would give to that question would be very consistent with the following. And in that list, there's really four themes. There's a theme that has to do with security, which is about money, earning a living, etc. There's a theme that has to do with challenge, with fulfillment rather, which is concerned with challenge or learning. There's a theme that has to do with career advancement or standing or significance. It's really a competitive thing, which is about power. And then there's a theme that's got a cooperative feel about it, which is about contributing to society and having a good relationship with colleagues, which is about harmony. Now, all four of those things are actually the product of how one's intent operates. To understand this, one has to first examine how one experiences the world. And in a sense, in any situation, you are encapsulated. The self is encapsulated by the other. Now, one's intent in terms of the moment that faces you can either be on one of two variables. It can either be based on what you're getting, and what you're getting moves from other to self, or it can be based on what you're giving, and what you're giving moves from self to other. If you base your security on what you're getting, because the universe rarely gives you what you want at that particular point in time, you'll always stay insecure. Whereas if you base your security on the quality of your contribution, because you always have control over what you're contributing and the quality of what you're contributing, you'll be secure. And exactly the same logic holds for fulfillment. If what makes you happy is what you're getting from the world, because the universe really gives you what you want, you will always stay discontented. Whereas if what makes you happy is the quality of what you're contributing, because you've always got control over that, you'll always be fulfilled. Further to this, if I deal with the world on the basis of what I want from it, I become weak. I've got no control over what I'm getting from the world. For example, if I want John's watch, clearly John's ability to withhold the watch gives him power over me, which means he can manipulate me. So when I deal with the other on the basis of what I want from the other, I'm weak. Whereas if I deal with the other on the basis of what I should be contributing, because I've got control over that, they can't manipulate me and I become powerful. So if I deal with John on the basis of how I can be helpful to him, I'm not weak, I'm powerful. Further to this, if I deal with John on the basis of what I want from him, not only is he dangerous to me because he can manipulate me, but precisely because I'm trying to get something from him, I'm dangerous to him. And if I'm dangerous to him and he's dangerous to me simultaneously, then clearly the implication of that is that we'll have conflict over time. If I shift my intent to how I can be helpful to John, he can't withhold the watch, so he can't manipulate me, and I'm therefore safe from him. But precisely because I'm not trying to be helpful to him, he's safe from me. And when I'm safe from him and simultaneously he's safe from me, we've got harmony with each other. Which means to say, at every level of discourse, however you look at the problem, you can account for the issue of human excellence on the basis of the intent to give or serve unconditionally.